Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We have an amazing discussion taking place supported by Jersey Finance and Spencer West Kenya. We are discussing governance and succession planning in family business. So let's give it a few seconds so that everyone can join the room, and then we'll get started. Thank you so much. Faizal, Catherine, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much for having us, Andrew. Pleasure to be on.
Very well, pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining. So for everyone tuning in, we have a very exciting conversation for you today on the topic of governance and succession planning for family businesses. So we have brought together Jersey Finance and Spencer West Kenya to give you the most up-to-date information on how we go about that and how you can handle that, utilizing spaces such as Jersey and the Channel Islands, and then some of the process to actually planning out your business, your family business, and the future of what you have going together. Now, if you're tuning in, whether it's on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, if you have a question throughout any of this webinar, please add your questions in the comments section. We will get to them later in the day, and we can tackle them from there. But I guess to start, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Barden. I'm the CEO of the Kenyan Wall Street, fastest growing business and finance digital media company here in Kenya, based at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. I will allow each of my guests to introduce themselves. Faizal, can we go over to you first?
Thank you very much, Andrew. My name is Faizal Bhana, and I'm the Director for the Middle East, Africa, and India at Jersey Finance. And Jersey Finance is the representative body for the financial services sector on the island of Jersey.
Thank you so much. Catherine?
Afternoon. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm a private client lawyer by trade. I'm a partner of Counsel with Spencer West in Kenya. I'm also a mediator and an arbitrator. Delighted to join this discussion on succession and governance, both from the perspective of planning and also in my role as advising on resolving disputes which arise both in the family and also family business context. Before we dive in, let me just throw a quick disclaimer. We are lawyers, but this is a thought leadership live discussion rather than legal consultation. Please don't take anything as legal advice.
Thank you so much for that, Faizal and Catherine. So let us jump into the first question. If you have any questions that you may not want to ask on the webinar or in the comments section, here's both Faizal and Catherine's email addresses here. You can reach out to them, ask them any questions you want, and you can take things from there. But if you have a question you're open to asking, please throw it in the comments section, no matter where you're watching this webinar. So thank you so much. Let's get started. So my first question, what is succession planning and governance? What do I need to know to start off this conversation?
Thank you very much. If I take that, Catherine, so I think, Andrew, the topic that you've selected is a critically important topic, not only from a Kenya perspective or an East African perspective, but a continental and a global perspective. You know, you and I and everybody and all of the listeners here would have heard on various media and continue to hear about this great wealth transfer that's taking place. You know, trillions of dollars, and the estimates are anyway from, 30 to 60 trillion dollars that is exchanging hands, moving from one generation to the other, and it's impacting almost every corner of the globe. Every jurisdiction, every country is seeing this transfer. Many factors obviously result in this transfer taking place, but the push, if I can say this, and maybe Catherine will have her own view on this, was when we had the COVID crisis. That brought this topic to the fore. You know, people were always talking about this, but obviously the urgency of it became clear, and the need for adequate and all-encompassing governance and succession plans became very, very important during that period. So to answer your question, I think, and at the simplest form, when you're talking about governance or succession in the context of family businesses and families, it refers to the structures, the processes, and systems that guide decision-making, ensure accountability, and balance the interests of the business, the family, and other stakeholders. We're going to expand on that because there are multiple stakeholders that are relevant when we look at that discussion. This is all crucial for the long-term sustainability, succession planning, and the conflict management. Again, we're going to tease out some of these concepts and talk a little bit more about that. Andrew, if you allow me a couple more minutes, why are we discussing this? So from a family business perspective, and let's look at it in the Kenyan context, 75% by some research parameters, 75% of GDP in Kenya comes from family businesses. 60% of total employment in Kenya comes again from family businesses. So you can see at the economic level, these family businesses are the engine rooms of the national economy. Now, in terms of how and when, again, we're going to expand on it as the conversation progresses. But what we're talking about in a nutshell, if I was going to put it into one sentence, we're looking at a timely, organized, agreed, implemented, and followed process, something that needs the consent of everybody that's within the family or all the stakeholders within the family business. These are two distinct bodies. You know, I want to start and make sure that your listeners understand that when we're talking about the governance and succession, we're talking about this at the family level, but also at the family business level. And then, of course, we'll also look at the consequences of getting this wrong. Failure at the business, and I've already talked about the unemployment and GDP contribution. Imagine if you have a big family business that fails, it has an impact, a wider impact beyond just that family. There's breakdown in relationships, brings it to the family itself. You know, you destruct the family legacy that the patriarch or matriarch of the families may have worked hard for decades to try and create. And because of one dispute that could have been prevented, all that is destroyed.
Yeah.
I'll finish this first part with these stats, just to provide some further context. 30% of family businesses, again, now we're talking about globally here, 30% of family businesses survive into second generation. 12% reach third generation, and only 3% make it to the fourth generation and beyond. So you can understand how, yes, exactly. But interestingly, and again, Big Four research tells us, where you have a well-governed, robust succession planning, professional management involved in the family business, and then clear governance structures within the business, within the family, this increases the chance of that family business by 2 or 3 times. So even those businesses that would naturally, based on the first, my first statistics, not make it beyond the 3rd generation, if you have these robust structures and governance in place, you give your family business a bigger and more chance of surviving into the 3rd generation and beyond.
Interesting. Now, before we hop over to Catherine, I do have a quick question. When you're talking about family businesses, it occurs to me that you seem to be talking about, the fairly affluent class of individuals. I mean, I guess I don't know how to word this, but how much net worth does a family need before they start thinking about some of these things?
No, that's a superb question, Andrew. I think there is this misconception. What we are going to talk about now, and what we're talking about now, are governance and succession structures that are relevant to all types of business. You start incurring costs when you start formalizing this with some legal structures, or you do something that is required from a legal perspective. But governance at its core, is about having rules for family businesses of all sizes. So even if you have, and every business starts from somewhere. I know you're involved with the FinTech Association in Kenya. These FinTechs were startups at some point, and then they grow with outside investment, outside equity or financing, and they become, unicorns, hopefully, and, et cetera, big businesses. But they start somewhere. And even family businesses start as sole proprietorships where the founder, the parent, decides to, he has a business idea, and then he grows it with hard work and effort, and then other family businesses and other family members and other stakeholders get involved. So when we talk about governance, it applies to every type of business. So every business, we're saying good practice. We're saying even if you're a one-man business, make sure you have rules in place that control the operation of that business, so that as it grows, and when you get to that stage, as you talked about, affluent stage. I don't want to put a number to it because that can be quite misleading. A number in one jurisdiction could be very different to another jurisdiction. I can see Katherine smiling at that as well. So I think it's important just to get that principle right. Let's get the rules right. Let's get understand the reasoning. So when you're looking at family businesses, we're looking at, Andrew, issues such as disputes or potential issues between those family members that are involved in the business, those that aren't involved in the business, those that want to be involved in the business, but they want to be involved at a very high level in the board of directors, for example, and not necessarily in the management of it. And then sometimes you have, family members that don't agree with the direction the family business is going in, and they say, I want out. So all of these interactions at the family level need to be taken care of. You need people like Katherine, Spencer West, and you've got other law firms that come in. You talk to Katherine and say to her, this is what our family looks like. My father created the business, or my grandfather or great-grandfather created the business. My father's now running it. My brothers and sisters are now involved in the business, and we have our children, nieces and nephews that want to get involved. Please tell us at the family level, how can we keep that harmony? How can we preserve the family legacy? How can we define our rules and roles and responsibility? How do we make it robust so when there's a dispute, we can deal with that dispute without the family business collapsing and, each of us being at each other's throat. So this is what this discussion is about, to say, okay, how can you make it orderly?
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Now, I want to hop over to Catherine real quick. What are some of the legal and regulatory issues that you run into when doing succession planning, governance structure and such from a family perspective?
Thank you. So the very first issue I normally consider with a family is whether they have a will or wills setting out their wishes clearly. So that's as relates to distribution of their estate when they die, but we're dealing with it in advance so that we can prepare. So that's implementing a will rather than leaving the estate to be distributed via statutory law. That often results in outcomes that will not align with the family's intended wishes on succession, or indeed any family expectations, and can lead, sadly, on the back end to disputes within the family that then turn into contested probate or litigation matters later, which is very stressful and costly. So at the very outset, I would always strongly encourage that I assist a family in drafting and maintaining an updated will to ensure their wishes are respected and later family disputes are minimized. Thinking again proactively, I would be discussing trusts. Families often overlook the value of trusts in protecting assets and managing wealth. A trust is effectively a legal arrangement where one party transfers assets to another party to hold and manage for the benefit of third party beneficiary. And the trustee has many duties in order to manage the trust assets according to the terms that the family can set out, and we can be very prescriptive about that. And that's normally drafted into something that you might have heard referred to as a trust deed. Trusts can be tailored for specific purpose, such as Jersey trusts. I'm sure Faizal and I will talk a little bit more about those as the conversation goes on. And it can be completely dependent on the family's goals. There's many benefits to that, such as minimizing tax exposure. So we're trying to be in the business of tax efficiency, not avoidance, for any of our KRA friends listening. So that's shielding assets from creditors or ensuring care actually for vulnerable beneficiaries, such as an adult with disabilities. And without trusts, families can really be exposed to higher tax liabilities and asset exposure.
Interesting. I do have a quick follow-up question on that.
Of course.
Here in Kenya, across much of the African continent, you see a lot of polygamous families, blended families, and such. How does that play a role into this? Because me, with my, generic American mind, that seems extremely complicated.
It is, but it's manageable. So as long as we're dealing and helping the family from the outset, we can implement structures such as wills and trusts that are religiously appropriate and factor in all of those elements. So that's including blended families, multiple families where there might be competing interests from different children born by different mothers. That can all be laid out very, very clearly in a will and a trust document, so avoiding later disputes.
Okay, interesting. Now, moving on from this, we've talked about this from the perspective of the family. Now, how about from the perspective of the business, the family business and such? So I guess my question is, why is it important? What are some of the challenges, opportunities of going through succession planning and governance from a business level?
So I think I'll start off, Catherine, then maybe you can sort of jump in there. I think, look, if I could just follow on in terms of what Catherine said. So I think, obviously, the solution of the trust is quite a robust and flexible kind of structure that families typically use that captures this multi-generation point. But you also have other kind of entities, like corporate entities. Some families also use that, and it'll become relevant when we start talking about family businesses in a moment. And also something called foundations. It's not, you don't have the foundation entity type within Kenyan law, but it's the middle between a trust and a corporate. So if you think of it as a spectrum, trust comes at one end, and as Catherine said, it's basically a contractual arrangement. Although you have trust law in Kenya that gives it legal basis, it's still a contractual arrangement determined and driven by the trust deed or governed by the trust deed. In the middle, you have a foundation. A foundation is if you think of a company without shareholders. So it's a legal entity in its own right, but it doesn't have it for the benefit of shareholders. Instead, it has beneficiaries. And then the third part is your typical company that you have, where you have a board of directors and shareholders, and you have the articles of association, memorandum of association. So this gives you broadly, and then in between that, you have other types of vehicles also, and we don't have the time to discuss all that in terms of partnerships, limited liability partnerships. It becomes too technical. So let's stick to these three forms, because it helps when you start thinking about governance and succession of the family business itself. So when you look at the family business of families, this is the unit that creates wealth. This is the source of the wealth. This is where it all started from. So it becomes quite important to understand and to make sure that at the same time as you're trying to you're trying to determine and lock in the rules of the family members, you also look at and make sure that the family business itself is protected. So, if you, let's think of a typical business that has already been in existence. So, we're not talking about a new or a smaller business here as an SME. We're talking about probably a large, medium-sized enterprise that perhaps is cross-border. So it's quite a complex business, that's doing quite well. And there's, research, again, independent research by organizations like ASOCA and PwC say to us, there are many, hundreds of these in Kenya, and thousands of them in East Africa. So if we think of a typical business like that, Kenya is at the forefront of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area and Agreement. They were the first signatories, first jurisdiction to implement it. So it's an entrepreneurial society. Again, I'll go back to research. Research from the Big Four tells us that within Kenya specifically, multiple generations of the business are already involved in the business operation. So now, if you think about your typical profile of this business, they are trying to take advantage of this opportunity that comes, for example, from Africa Free Continental Trade Area. So they want to grow. So they want to, for example, attract outside investment in, or raise finance, or do an IPO, or things like that. That forces them to professionalize. So when that comes in, they want to professionalize. That could be one reason that they're professionalizing. Another reason for professionalizing themselves is to prepare the entry of the next gen coming into the business. Families professionalize their businesses for many reasons. But once you get down on that journey, Andrew, what you're looking at is the business is then saying, okay, what is in the best interest of the business and the shareholders and the wider stakeholders? Me as a family member running this, is that in the best interest of the business, or shall I bring in professional CEOs, professional C-suite, finance, investment, operations? So that adds another layer of kind of professional management that comes in. So what the governance does in that instance is it sets out the rules to say, between family management and professional management, this is how the interaction is going to be. Obviously, if it's a limited company, the board of directors plays a significant part in determining the strategy of that family business. It needs to be done in the interest of shareholders. Obviously, shareholders are the family at the top, but the family may actually be board of directors. And I know Catherine is going to talk a little bit about board composition and how that plays out. But if I can, at a very high level, say the issues that you're trying to sort of lock in are the interaction between the professional management and the family management, the interaction between the family, the board of directors and management generally, and then the interaction between the management at the top tier and the employees and other stakeholders. We're going to talk about next gen, I'm sure, in a moment. And when you look at next gen, one of the key characteristic of this new next gen is their kind of outlook on impact. How are my actions as the next gen, my family's actions as the business owners, the management's action as those responsible for the operation of the business impact my community, the wider country, the continent, and the globe. So when you start looking at these kind of considerations, you need to have robust governance and structure in place to make sure that all these interactions are done in a harmonious way to preserve the operation of the business, to grow the business, but at the very least, just to make sure that there's no disputes that will negatively impact the operation of the business and ultimately the source of wealth for the family.
Okay, interesting. And, one of the things this brings up, I guess, at least in my mind, and I'm sure a few of our viewers, is the issue of meritocracy versus nepotism. One of the biggest fears I think most organizations have with working with family businesses is, how do I know I'm getting, the business's best interests as opposed to, the family or a particular uncle's best interests? Can governance help balance out that eternal argument between meritocracy and nepotism?
Again, a superb question, and I'm sure Catherine will agree, the source of a lot of disputes. Families fall out because of this very reason. I think, I can answer this, and I'll pass it on to Catherine, because I think Catherine can give you a more legal and regulatory kind of solution-based response. But if I can give you an insight into what I see in the markets that I operate, I cover the Middle East, Africa, and India, and we as an organization are quite unique. Jersey, as an IFC, has a global footprint, so we have a bird's eye view of what's going on in key capitals of capitals of the world, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Dubai, whether it's in Riyadh, whether it's in London, Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Lagos, Nairobi, or Cairo. So, and I can tell you one thing, and this is an important thing to remember for your listeners: the issues are almost always the same. And it's amazing how, they will manifest in a different way, but the underlying issue is always the same. And you hit the nail on the head when you said nepotism versus meritocracy. Usually, the kind of issues that we come up over and over again when we're looking at family businesses, when they approach us as a jurisdiction and say, how can Jersey assist us? How can your how can your award-winning finance industry support us in these challenges? The challenges they have are, some of the things that you've mentioned there, where you have, one particular branch of the family or one family member dominating the business, and others feel that they're not getting the value that they want to. They feel they have the skills and the expertise to be able to contribute, but they can't. This can be gender, this can be age, this can be different branches of the family. So it can be determined by a lot of factors. We also typically see within this dynamic, younger generation feeling almost as out of touch. They feel like this business does not meet my expectations. I've gone out to the West. I'll give you a Kenyan example. You have a lot of families in Kenya, a lot of family businesses in Kenya that have sent their children out to get educated. They come back to this business and said, this is very archaic. You're doing business in a way, in a sector, in a field that doesn't really match. Fintech. I'm sure you're coming up in your fintech cap. I'm sure you come across a lot of family businesses and a lot of family members that sort of express that. So how do you make it more inclusive? And these are the kind of challenges. So what have I seen? I've seen situations where the family, at the family level. So we go back to the family governance point. They say any family member that's involved only comes into the business after they've spent sufficient time outside with a competitor or in a different sector to build their own expertise and experience.
Okay.
I've seen instances where the family say, no, there needs to be a minimum qualification threshold. They need to be MBA in terms of getting into C-suite. Or I've also seen instances in Kenya where the family says, no, you want to be involved, you've got to start from the bottom. work your way up, create your credibility internally so people feel that the right person has made it to the choice. And conversely, at the other end of the spectrum, again, Andrew, I have seen businesses, not necessarily within Kenya, but perhaps in the Middle East and in India, where the family says, we don't want any of our family members to be involved in the business. You're going to sit at the board, you can be at the strategy level, or you can be in advisory committees that advise the board, but there's going to be no family members involved in the family business. We're going to run this professionally. So you can have all sorts of mixtures, and the beauty is, one size does not fit all. You can have what you want to make this work for your family. So this is what I see in the different markets that we operate. But how do you sort of legalize it, and how do you say, this is probably something for Catherine? How can the families, what can they do, in terms of trying to, she probably is better placed to advise.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for transitioning for me, Catherine. As Faisal said, how do we legalize? How do we make this all make sense in legalese?
That's where we step in. So yes, I mean, a solution to those sort of overlapping roles and perhaps unclear boundaries that Faisal was alluding to would be to draft a family charter. So we sit with a family and work through the beginnings and end of a formal written document that outlines the vision, values, rules, and governance framework for managing the family's involvement in the business, or shared wealth, or both. It serves as somewhat of a constitution for the family, so it provides clarity on roles, responsibilities, and decision-making processes. It can even go so far as to establish employment contracts and appoint professional managers to formalize roles and reduce conflicts. We can also develop comprehensive shareholder agreements. So looking at, say, a lack of clear agreement on ownership or voting rights or share transfers, which often I will see, we can develop a comprehensive shareholder agreement, which can include buy-sell provisions, meaning it can set out the rules for transferring ownership, as well as affording minority protections for minority shareholders and voting mechanisms. So it can be as descriptive as you like, really, and the aim is to avoid future conflict. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to jump in on that subject, Faisal.
Yeah, so look, I think family constitutions widely are very important documents, but they're only as good as the agreement of the family. I've had, and believe it or not, I've had family members say to me, what do we need as a minimum just to make sure we have something that everybody's happy with? That defeats the purpose. I think if you go back to what we're talking about here, we're talking about harmonizing it, making it equitable, making it fair, having the buy-in of all the stakeholders that are impacted by this. Remember, at the family business level, it's not only the family members that are involved in the business or the management of it, but you're talking about professional management. You're talking about the wider employees. You're talking about the customers of the business. And then ultimately, you're talking about the economy. I started off by saying how important family businesses are to Kenya. So you can imagine even the Kenyan government has a say in these kind of things to say, this is what we want from you. So this is why you have these kind of insights that come in. So, I've always said this, and I'll say this, and we were having this conversation beforehand. Tax is another driver for professionalization. I've talked about outside investment, outside financing, the desire to professionalize. But sometimes the tax that a state imposes requires the businesses to professionalize so that they're able to demonstrate to the authorities that the information that they're providing is the systems have the integrity and accuracy to be able to determine what is actually due to the state. So I think instead of looking at it in terms of just the constitutional documents or the family constitution or other governance document, it's looking at how do you get to that. Get the agreement of the family, get as many of the stakeholders, signed into it so that it survives any one stakeholder. The idea is that, I see in the very large, complex, complicated families, they have family days, they have, outings, they have these councils, they have a permanent mediator appointed within the family that sits there to help them navigate these complexities. So I think these are quite important. And let's not forget also that within the legal and regulatory framework, and Catherine can correct me, but for example, listed entities, and some families may be part of listed entities, will prescribe what needs to be done. So from at a board level, they'll say you need to have X number of females, for example, or there'll be ESG requirements that are determined by law. So these are the kind of things that are coming from a legal and regulatory side, but also the family itself needs to sort of come up and say, okay, these are the kind of solutions that we need to have in place. I think remuneration is quite an important point. Remuneration, responsibility, and the roles that family and non-family play in the business, if these are defined, agreed, and followed to the T, audited independently, updated when they needed to, these are quite important.
I'm with you 100%. It really, at least from my, opinion, my point of view, is that a lot of these issues come from just having structure. If you have a structure in place, when you have a question, when you have an argument, you have a document, you have a constitution, you have something you can go to that says, all right, how do we resolve this? Okay, the next steps are X, Y, Z. All right, there's the resolution. Like my family member or not, that's what we got to go with. I'm sure both of you have seen this within your careers. The dispute resolution thing is such an important piece, and I think it really does also come down to, Faizal, you used the word earlier, next gen. I'm assuming that means next generation, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely spot on. Next generation are the drivers of these family businesses that we're talking about. They are the future decision makers of these families that we're talking about. And we try and summarize it as Jersey. Because we deal with such diverse types of families from across the continent, it's very difficult to try and provide a description that fits all. But let me try and attempt something that sort of touches on some of these kind of key points, and then give you my view on the importance of the next gen, and perhaps Catherine can supplement on that. But essentially, next generation, I already alluded to this, they're highly educated, they are tech savvy, they're citizens of the world, focused on impact beyond them. So this is quite an important thing. If you take these 4 or 5 parameters, and then you replicate that in the context of a family, family at the top and family business at the bottom, you then start to realize their importance. I've mentioned this a couple of times now. In Kenya, we know from independent Big Four research that multiple generations of the businesses are already involved in the operation of the business. So if you think about a tech-savvy person coming into an old trading business, immediately you can think about them thinking of these solutions. And, some of these things I can't even fathom. We talk about AI, we talk about these kind of things that are becoming increasingly important at the global stage, but try and bring it down to the family business. It's the next generation that are driving that. So, you have the challenges that come with that is that, you have next generation that are quite ambitious. And, with that comes a lot of challenges around trying to not control, but trying to create parameters for them to flourish. So this is where, I've seen situations where families say to next generation that not necessarily align with the business direction to say, we're going to give you a small pot and we're going to set up a venture for you. You go out there and prove yourself in what you want to do. Or alternatively, you also have next generation that come in and they get the free hand to improve the business, take it to the next level. I don't want to say that the level that the business is at is not doing well, because it's created the wealth that has brought the next generation to that stage there. But it's development. It's a natural development in there. So next gen drive that. So you have to have parameters around that. How does that look like? I already talked about the interaction between professional management and the family management. In a lot of the cases, the family management will be this next gen. So are you, going back to your point, Andrew, is it nepotism or is it going to be meritocracy? So are you saying to this next gen, we want you to start from the shop floor, work your way up? So what is that going to look like in the context of next gen? Are you going to get them mentoring? How are you going to develop that next gen? Are you going to get them out into the world, into other businesses, to try and see what that looks like? So that's one. How do you develop? How do you nurture? How do you bring them in? The other part that you get from next generation is not necessarily the family side. Remember, at the family business level, you're going to nurture the people that are good. I think it was.
I mean, you don't want to make it feel like, hey, if you're an upstanding employee who's worked for 20 years, you can't,
Exactly.
move up just as far as family members, correct?
Exactly.
That kind of gets to what you're saying.
Exactly. So I'm talking about succession is also relevant when it's non-family members. There could be a star within your junior ranks that you feel that, he's a future CEO of the business. So how do you nurture that talent? How do you incentivize that talent? How do you make sure that you keep that talent? In the Middle East and in certain parts of Africa, you get government bodies or other competitors coming in and taking your key staff, right? And saying that, we're going to poach this staff because he's the reason that the business is successful. So that's another angle to look at. And then finally, Andrew, in this part, the other quite important thing is gender. It's important. How do you make it fair so that both gender, whether it's family, non-family, within the business are nurtured, respected, have the same opportunities? I talked about it in the previous question where I said regulation and laws to a certain degree force that on the larger, for example, listed entities. But a good business, a good family business, a forward-thinking family would preempt some of these things and make sure they have systems and processes in place that make sure that this is a norm, that fairness is something that is a norm within this process.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Now I'm gonna hop over to Catherine real quick because I need I need the Kenyan kind of legal concept on some of these things. And of course, this isn't advice. You're going to have to email Catherine Faizal for that later.
Yeah, I can jump in on the sort of next gen points if you'd like, from my perspective. So look, we advise family businesses and families on exactly these issues. And as Faizal correctly pointed out, next generation, certainly from what I can see in Kenya, are sophisticated, well-educated, diverse individuals, male, female, and have experience in business, often across jurisdictions. But they will struggle often to balance their, let's call it, inherited wealth against the leadership roles and their responsibility of stewardship for the family wealth. So it's a great amount of pressure. And sometimes they just don't possess the required leadership qualities because of their age and maybe experience level. But there's many leadership training programs and mentorship opportunities, which we would advise next generation members of the family business to undertake. It helps them understand their responsibilities and develop a lot of the necessary skills to lead, and develop that trust with, as you say, other members of staff who have been there longer than them, and trying to avoid that undercurrent of hostility that might develop later. So always proposing leadership training and mentorship opportunities where appropriate. And a clear governance framework really helps to make their role clear. It helps both the family business and it helps the next gen member. It avoids things like mismanaging assets later or straining family relationships. And it's difficult to work with family. It's certainly possible, and it's understood that it's beneficial as long as the right people are coming into line. But generational differences can often create a lot of tension between preserving the family legacy and adopting next gen's often more innovative approach for business growth. But fostering that collaboration between the two generations through structured dialogue, through structured documentation and agreements, can create this really nice shared decision-making platform. And that will empower then next generation members to drive innovation while still respecting legacy values. Their elder family members know a lot and have experienced a lot, and there's value in that legacy. But a failure to bridge that gap is where we see, on my more dispute resolution side, we see significant breakdowns in family where, on one hand, one side doesn't feel respected based on their experience, and on the other side, there's so much, technology and innovation that next generation members wish to adopt, where obviously the traditional family businesses may struggle with that adoption based on their knowledge base, but it can limit growth and competitiveness. So it's understandable why the next generation want to pursue those avenues. But then it would make sense, from my perspective, to empower next generation to lead on those digital transformations. And the other members of the family business can use next generation's familiarity with technology, AI, digital tools, rather than seeing it as hampering.
Okay, interesting. And, I feel like you two have mentioned a few of the solutions we have. Like, much of this conversation has been going into like many of the problems and issues that can arise. But you've hinted at a few potential solutions, such as a family constitution, shareholder agreements, and such. If I had a family business today and I had nothing, there was no paperwork, nothing behind it. It was just me, and my little business, where would I start? And then as the company grows, what kind of other, typical solution strategies would I be looking at implementing to ensure that, maybe my children, and such can take that over one day?
Happy for me to take that, Faisal, or do you want to pop in?
No, go for it.
So, everyone, family, business, or family, I advise, wills, a will, looking at trusts, at least giving advice on trusts, and then the hybrid solution that Faisal alluded to earlier. So a company being formulated to manage investments and so forth. Depending on the level that's needed, at least a will would be needed. And a trust often, to be honest. Either it's incorporated within the will, or it can be a standalone document and either incorporated or unincorporated. That's a more technical issue. Then family charters, even if it's a small business, it can be a very useful way of formalizing even just family values, roles. There's a lot of dispute that later arises around roles and who was supposed to make a decision and over what. And those processes can be very clearly outlined in a succinct document, preventing future dispute. Likewise, shareholder agreements are really useful, setting out all, defining ownership rights, transfer processes, decision-making mechanisms. It just ensures fairness and stability within the family business. And then, depending on the size, you mentioned perhaps if you grew, then we would look at more corporate governance structures. So by way of implementing professional boards sometimes, or a mix of family and independent directors that can provide accountability and strategic oversight. So just structured succession planning is key. All of these tools can apply to both families and family businesses of any size, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Faisal, you might anything else.
It's almost a question of like being prepared is better than figuring it out when an issue arises. That's what all of this occurs to me as. If we have a roadmap on where to go, we're not, watching the road signs last minute on how to get somewhere. we know that, hey, in 30 kilometers, my turn is coming up.
Absolutely.
That's just my anecdotes. But Faizal, do you have anything to add?
No, no. I think that summarizes that quite neatly. I think it's about being proactive. It's about planning ahead, and it's about making sure that there's buy-in. I think even when you're a small startup, you still will have stakeholders, and you need to make sure that those that need to be brought into that conversation are brought into that conversation quite early, and then any disagreements are agreed upon. And the bigger you get, the more stakeholders there are, then, and the longer those conversations take. So, it's important to be patient. It's important to make sure when you need to have outside help. People like Katherine are there. They're experienced. They've seen it all. Within our jurisdiction, we have practitioners that have seen and been involved in every eventuality. We have trustees that have seen all the disputes you can think of. So, and of course, there's a cost element to it. So, you alluded to that quite early. If you're a small business, it's not a cost-efficient way to go out to a big law firm and say, look, can you come in? It needs to be proportionate to what you're looking to achieve. At the very minimum, like you said, put it on a piece of paper yourself so that, people that are around you understand, your kind of ethos in terms of your business. And then as you grow, bring others in, and, you get to a level where it becomes justified to have outside help. Then you surround yourself with the best help you can get, because you then prevent issues for the future. As lawyers, we say we make all these agreements to prevent disagreements in the future, right? So, you want to make sure you think of the kind of things that will impact you. The characters in your family. You've hired all the C-suite. The kind of what ticks and what doesn't work for them. So you make sure you cover all these things. So I think pre-planning is very, very important.
Okay, and we've hinted on a few of these, but I'd love almost like a list or something. Like, what are the consequences if I just had a family business and said I'm not going to do any of this?
Probably real life examples from you, I guess.
Yes, you would be like pretty much all of my clients. No, so people will, look, I'll go through sort of alluding to or touching on the issues we've already discussed. The consequence of not separating family and business interests, for example, is that a lot of the emotional dispute can spill into business operations. So I see that. It also damages decision-making ability, employee morale, and actually long-term business viability. Potentially more seriously, also regulatory scrutiny can arise if personal and business assets are intertwined. Faisal, you might have some comment there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's critically important to make sure. I mean, we've seen cases of where a little dispute, Andrew, something that is probably insignificant to the operation of the business, can snowball into something so massive. And if you don't have the dispute resolution or the mediation process built in within your governance structure, that you don't have an avenue to deal with that. So what happens is that I'll give you a real life example. You have two key decision makers in a massive group not talking to each other because of disputes between their respective wives. And this kind of, if you don't have that avenue to be able to deal with it within your family governance or family business governance, like Katherine says, it can have a negative and destructive impact within your family business.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Faisal, Jersey Finance has helped us put together today's webinar and such. I'm curious, I'm an American. When I heard Jersey, I was thinking New Jersey. I learned something new. But tell me, I mean, what does Jersey provide in regards to succession planning, family business governance, and such? What does Jersey provide that you may not be able to find in other jurisdictions?
Look, thank you very much for the question. And actually, between New Jersey and Jersey, we do actually have links. So
Okay.
we had delegations visit our own governments visited there as well. So there are close ties. Look, as a jurisdiction, we're an award-winning international finance center, or an IFC. We've been in existence for 60 odd years. We have the oldest trust codified law in the world. We have the largest chapter of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners globally. This is a professional organization. I think you yourself are one, if I'm not mistaken, Catherine, a STEP practitioner. But globally, you have STEP practitioners that are experts in this space that help families, businesses, advise them to get their house in order. The largest chapter in the world is in Jersey. Our regulation, our laws are common law based, and they're robust. They've been developed over these 60 years plus, looking at all these kind of. So as an industry, we have four main pillars, and private wealth or private client forms quite a key part of that one of the pillars. And our expertise on island, our experience, practitioners, some of whom travel very regularly to the continent, to Africa, to Kenya. In fact, we have certain practitioners in Kenya at the moment. They come in, they talk to the family, so they understand those challenges. It's not about being an expert on the local regulations that are available in Kenya and East Africa. Katherine, Spencer West in Kenya, and firms like that are the experts. But we work and partner with the local experts on the ground to provide globally recognized solutions. Now, that's our industry. So we've got a robust legal and regulatory framework, independent legislature that creates the laws, independent judiciary that provides protection of enforcing some of these structures. And we provide these international platforms to entrepreneurs, including from Kenya, for their global ambitions. So, we provide this platform to allow them to expand their businesses, to invest out, but also bring inward investment into the continent, into the country, creating jobs and supporting GDP. We did some independent research a few years ago to try and look at the impact of Jersey. Andrew, if I can just give you a couple of findings, and this will surprise you. At a global level, the global value change that Jersey contributes to from an African perspective, on average, in the period that we and this was independent research, so it's not us doing the research, it's an independent CEBR in the UK. They did this independent research. They found Jersey supported £6 billion of GDP annually, which translated into 916,000 jobs a year. This is a period between 2017 and 2020. We deliberately removed the COVID period because obviously that had its own challenges that could skew the numbers. So that tells you about the impact of our small island has in terms of value creation, even on the continent. So that's at a high level. But then when you drill down in this particular topic of succession and governance, I talked about, and Katherine, very articulately spoke about trusts and other kind of entities. So within Jersey, we have these entities, and these have been the entities and the laws that have been, for want of a better word, copied and rejigged in different ways in different jurisdictions. Some of these jurisdictions are prominent now across the globe, across the continent, actually. And it's the highest form of flattery. So, we are very proud of that because it gives our experienced practitioners within our award-winning finance industry to be able to come in and collaborate at that level, because the laws are quite similar. But we have trust laws that are protected within our legal and regulatory framework. We have corporate and company laws, so that, if you want to set up a company as opposed to a trust, we have that ability to do that. And I talked about foundations. Foundations are quite an important tool as well. We have that, limited liability partnership. So all of the tools that are available within the tool kit of practitioners like Katherine and her partners at Spencer West, we as a jurisdiction provide from an international perspective. So they interact with the local structures you have within within the Kenyan legal and regulatory system. And just to be absolutely clear, these are not there as a substitute. They're there to collaborate and partner and work within the local structures that Katherine and her team, for example, would advise. We bring in the international dimension. We bring in that dimension that provides, like I said, platform to the entrepreneurial Kenyan family businesses and families, corporates, institutions for their global ambitions. So we try and partner up. So this is what our jurisdiction brings to the discussion.
Okay, well, awesome. If anyone has any questions tuning in, please add them in the comments section. We'd love to go through them here in a moment. And, we do have one question from Mr. Bernard asking, is this recorded and available later for viewing? Absolutely. You can see it on the Kenyan Wall Street YouTube page in probably less than 10 seconds after we conclude this webinar. So yeah, thank you so much. I do have a quick question for you two. Again, I know I've owned all the questions so far. Let me take another moment. The HBO series Succession. I don't know, have either of you seen that?
Big fan.
I would say it depicts some of the issues that we see in real life.
It's real.
Yeah.
That was my question, is like, how legitimate is that show?
It's fairly accurate. It's fairly accurate. I mean, obviously jurisdictionally dependent. It's not Kenya, but what we're discussing today, and it's definitely a more cinematic view, but I think it's fairly accurate. Unlike Split, that family law show that came out that was not remotely accurate to the legal system in the UK.
And just to echo, the underlying issues, the dispute between the family members, the influence of the sister over the brothers, the father's need to have control, all of the periphery, the non-direct family members, professional management, how they're manipulated by the family for different reasons. These are all of the daily issues, and a robust governance framework and a robust succession plan would go a long way in preventing and avoiding some of these issues.
Okay, interesting. I have another question for you two. How young do you have, like when is a good age for someone to start thinking about, succession planning, family, business planning and such?
I think from my side, go for it.
I was going to say we often are heard lawyers saying it's births, deaths, and weddings when people start thinking about these things. But really, as soon as you can afford a basic will draft, which is not particularly costly, I would add, and even prior to that, you can draft your own, albeit with added contingencies, added caveats. Sorry. Yes, as early as you can, really. It avoids future potential gaps and errors, especially in the family business context, because it's not just your legacy you're talking about here. It's everyone else around you and how that impacts them, their families, their marriages, their subsequent marriages, their other businesses. It's really important to have things noted, at least in writing, from my perspective, as early as you can.
Yeah, and I would add on there, Andrew, obviously complexity, costs, all play a key part. So I think when you're a smaller business and when you're a younger business, you probably need to rely on, advisory services provided by the government, for example, free government advisory. Some of the financial institutions, banks, if you take a bank loan, they'll provide you with some advisory. There's a lot of free stuff out there that is good quality, that you can rely on, at least in the early stages, to get something there on a piece of paper, like Katherine says. And then as you grow, the key is, as you grow, surround yourself with people that can help you make sure that you've got everything robustly locked in, in terms of what your intentions are and how you want your business, your project, your family to grow.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for that. We do have a question from someone on LinkedIn who asked, how would owners of agricultural land benefit from an offshore trust, and what would a hypothetical structure look like? So yeah, I guess maybe we can shift the question up a little bit, but when we've been talking about family businesses, agricultural land is very much an aspect of family business. So what benefit would Jersey provide, would having these structures provide, if, say, the person asking the question here owns, a ranch or has some agricultural land that they want to make sure stays within the family in the future?
Look, I think this is a very good question, Andrew. I think it's important to understand that you don't start with the solution. There's no point in talking about what's the benefit of an offshore trust, because it's not necessarily the solution for everything. So I think the question should really be, or the path should really be, go and speak to someone like Katherine. She is the expert not only from a Kenyan perspective, but she has access to international bouquet of available solutions. And then she would sit down with you and say to you that where, for example, land is involved in Kenya, this may not be the solution. Your solution probably lies in a similar structure. You have trusts under Kenyan law. If you do want to put it into a trust, you have a solution available in Kenyan law, and someone like Katherine or her partners will tell you, actually, for you, the solution is this, or for you, the solution is this. So I think it's not about starting at the solution. It's about starting the conversation in setting out what are your circumstances and what are your objectives. And then people like Katherine and also from our finance industry, they can sort of jointly work together and say, okay, this is what works, this is what doesn't work. Katherine may turn around and say, actually, there's no role for Jersey in this one. So you guys need to sit outside. This is an all Kenya solution. So this is what I would say. It's without going into specifics. I think it's important to have that mindset to say, actually, let's take a step back. What do you have? What's your assets? What's your beneficiary? What's your family look like? What's your future objectives? And then talk to someone like Katherine so that she can then start talking about what are relevant solutions for you. Katherine, would you agree with that?
I totally agree. Thank you. I would be doing a disservice to the person who asked the question if I were to give a brief summary of the offshore potential benefits of offshore trusts. But it's more about getting to know the client, or first interview. Let's discuss that. Getting to know the client, their needs, mapping out all possible avenues, perhaps cross-examining certain options against others, and the advisors that come through from Jersey and agents. We have a very good working relationship. So if there's a Jersey trust is a suitable option for my client, I will choose that. But as Faizal rightly pointed out, if it isn't suitable, they won't be going to Jersey. There's so many options to even consider in line with the tools we've already discussed today. So we've already alluded to some options that might suit that prospective client, but I won't go into a detailed response on that for obvious reasons. I would need to have much more information.
Okay. Yeah, for the person who asked that question, I actually have both of their emails here. They allowed me to put it on the screen so that you can reach out. Faizal, Catherine, those are the correct emails, right?
Yes.
Looks good.
Perfect. Awesome. So, yeah, I think, this is starting to wrap up much of our conversation today. I learned a lot. I learned, as a 20-something-year-old, I need to start working on this. It doesn't have to be super complicated for me at this age, but, there should at least be some sort of structure and such. So I'll reach out to Catherine and such, and I'm sure she can tell me, what is right for me. And I'm sure she can do the same for you as well. And if Jersey is the right place for you, I'm sure she'll recommend that as well. But Faizal, Catherine, do you have any final remarks, any final takeaways? If I forgot this entire conversation, what do I need to remember moving forward in life?
Go for it, Katherine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Faisal will agree with this, but bringing in the right advisors for me. So around my clients where we can build a team, whether that's legal, finance, tax, or otherwise. And then through leveraging those specific vehicles and tools that we discussed today, families can really address both personal and business succession challenges very effectively, which ensures not just preservation of wealth and relationships, but also the growth of family businesses and sustainability across generations.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is that, we've had an hour and a half of a conversation around this. This is probably a 2-week workshop if you gave it. So, to your listeners, especially those that haven't embarked on this journey, it will seem overwhelming and complex, and it doesn't have to be. Think about your own circumstances. It is actually quite, the start of it is always difficult. Starting something is always difficult, but as you get into it, it becomes clearer and clearer. It needs to be cost effective for you, of course. It needs to meet your needs, of course. But this is where you have advisors like Catherine, etc., that can help you and support you and hold your hands through this process. Surround yourself with the best advisors that you're able to afford, that you're able to deal with, and make sure you start early and you put things down on a piece of paper. In the more complex, the more complicated family arrangements, it's important to get the buy-in of everybody. The biggest issue we find is that 1 or 2 family members are left behind, and these are the ones that always have an issue, and the whole structure unravels because of these, because they are quite strong in their will and they want to make sure that they get what they want because they want included at the outset. As Catherine said, at the very minimum, please have your will. Make sure you have something on a piece of paper, so at least that will prompt you to then start moving up and thinking about the rest of your wealth, the rest of your structure. How do you harmonize those relationships? How do you preserve those family relationships? How do you preserve the family legacy? I'm sure every one of your listeners is reading newspapers of old traditional businesses being destroyed because of legal conflict, because they didn't deal with the kind of issues that we've talked about today. So surround yourself with good people, start early, be comprehensive, and bring everybody with you in that conversation.
Okay, well, Faizal, Catherine, thank you so much for spending an hour and almost 15 minutes with us today.
You're lucky you got us wrapped up in that time.
Absolutely. And, I learned so much just personally beyond, hosting this discussion. So I really appreciate it. And for everyone who wants to continue conversation, continue questions, you can reach out to Faizal, Catherine. Their emails are on the screen. If you're trying to reach me, you can always message me on LinkedIn. I'm mostly available on that platform as well. And take a look at Jersey Finance as well. Jersey is quite an interesting jurisdiction. As I had mentioned earlier, I didn't know very much about it. And ever since we started planning this webinar, I've come to find out I actually know people who live in Jersey.
Wow.
So that's it's
There you
incredibly
go.
exciting. Thank you guys so much for your time. And please join us back here for a webinar in 2 weeks with Mavita Homes on the state of real estate investment here in Nairobi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.